Good morning, students. It's good to be back, and let's start, or rather, let's try and finish the chapter, the last chapter from the book, the first book, that is part one, Thinkers, Beliefs, and Buildings. Now, if you remember, we had already finished most of about Lord Mahavira, of course, that we had, and of course, to a great deal about Gautam Buddha, about his teachings and about his early life and what about the early evolution of Buddhism. All of that has been done. But one very important thing is left in this chapter, which is yet to be covered, is stupas. Now, students, you have to understand that Buddhism happens to be one of the very unique faith systems, whereby now we all know what stupa is, right? We have seen it across the country, and yes, we see it across the country because it carries very important relics. It carries a certain things that were certain items that were used by Gautam Buddha himself. Then, of course, the great teachers of Buddhism. So their sometimes their body remains. So these are essentially constructions which carry those holy things, which are considered extremely holy by the followers, that is the Buddhists. But you have to understand, why did they do it? It's Hinduism had great many rishis and maharishis, but we never went into this practice of kind of preserving their items that were used by them, or erecting buildings around it. Or this was something which was very very unique to Buddhism as far as subcontinent is concerned, because Buddhism came out of, because Gautam Buddha was a Kshatriya himself. He was born as a Hindu. Now, similarly, you have to understand that, just kind of widening the topic, you have to understand that Mahavira also he was also Kshatriya. Then you have to understand that Guru Nanak Dev ji was himself a Hindu, right? He was born as a Hindu. Now, but none of all of them went their separate ways, started their own faith systems, and had their own set of followers, but none of them went into this practice of preserving, their sacred items, and whether it was in terms of their body parts, or whether it was in terms of their ashes, or the items that was used by them, and erecting buildings around it. But why was it unique to the Buddhists themselves? Students, you have to understand what one of the very very important reasons was, that Gautam Buddha did not ever believed in God. Okay, you have to understand that he never believed in God. He just felt that the whole universe was run by, was controlled and run by certain universal laws. Okay, and those laws were constant; they would never change. And the whole, the minutest of atoms to the biggest of the planets and stars and galaxies, all of them were guided by certain universal laws, and that is how it was. So Gautam Buddha, he never wanted to be known as Lord Buddha, and he was just a teacher, and he wanted to live as a teacher because he lived, of course, as a teacher, but then he also wanted to die as a teacher, and he didn't want to be remembered as Prabhu Buddha and Lord Buddha and those kind of things. No, as long as he was alive, he was very very strict about it. That yes, he just wanted to be treated and respected as a teacher, as a good teacher probably. But of course, yes, and that's how it was. But then once he was gone, you have to understand that we are human beings. We want to commemorate the memories. If you know what I'm talking about, even in our homes for that matter, we have large photographs or portraits of our granddads and dadaji or nani or nanaji, or even for some of us, even our parents, and jinko we garland them, their photographs, and keep it in the in our drawing rooms, or in our puja room, or our bedroom, wherever it is. So we are human beings, we like to commemorate it. And it is not very unique only to our culture. You have to understand that the Christians do it, all of them do it, that they have the large images of their dads and the granddads and their mothers and the grandmothers, all of that, because we would like to preserve their memories. And it was the same thing that happened with Buddhists, because though Gautam Buddha was strictly against all this image worship and statue worship, and most importantly, he himself being treated as someone who was as important as very important or something. He just wanted to be remembered as teachers. But then after he was gone, people, his followers, wanted to commemorate his memories, and then they gradually started making stupas so that his memory could definitely no one could see those books or probably the ashes, but then definitely there was a whole elaborate structure that was erected around it, and which would have their engraved on the stones the life of Buddhas, the life of the great teachers, and just to kind of commemorate their memories. And that is how it was, and that is how this whole culture of building of stupa happened, because people have this habit and this tendency of preserving memories. So how were the stupas built? Now, inscriptions found in the railings and pillars of the stupa recorded donations made for buildings and decorating them. Some donations were made by kings such as the Satavahanas. Others were made by the guilds. As you know, some of you are, I'm sure, economics students. Guilds are trading associations, such as that of ivory workers who financed part of one of the gateways at Sanchi. Hundreds of donations were made by women and men who mentioned their names, sometimes adding the name of the place from where they came from, as well as their occupations and names of their relatives. Bhikkhus and bhikshunis also contributed towards building these monuments. The structure of the stupa. Stupa is a Sanskrit word meaning a heap, or rather originated as a simple semicircular mold of earth, later called anda. Gradually, it evolved into a more complex structure, balancing round and square shapes. Above and under was the hamika, a balcony structure, and represent. Guys, this is essentially about the architecture of stupa. The early stupas at Sanchi and Bhurut were plain except for some stone railings, which were resembled a bamboo or a wooden fence, and the gateways, which were richly carved and installed at the four cardinal points. Cardinal points means important points. Worshippers entered through the eastern gateway and walked around the mold in a clockwise direction, keeping the mold on the right, imitating the sun's course through the sky. Later, the mold of the stupas came to be elaborately carved with niches and sculptures, as at Amravati and Shahji Ki Kheri in Peshawar, Pakistan, that is today's Pakistan. Okay, and students, if you remember, I've always said in this chapter and probably in certain other chapters, and even if you when you were in class 11, if you remember, then that at one point in time, the present areas, though it is very difficult to believe now, that the areas around northern Pakistan and whole of Afghanistan, those areas were extremely, they had extremely, they were very important Buddhism sites. Some of the greatest teachers of Buddhism used to live there. uh, they had great and very elaborate and very large uh, um, universities and schools of Buddhism, and some of the greatest Buddhist teachers came from that area. Now, it is very difficult now to even conceptualize that Afghanistan once was a Buddhist country or a Buddhist land, or the tribal areas today of northern Pakistan, which are considered to be the most violent places on the planet. they were Buddhist areas. So, discovering stupas, the fate of Amravati and Sanchi. Students, this topic, I clearly remember. This question came for this CBSE Class 12 examination about the Amravati and Sanchi stupa this time. So, these are important topics. Each stupa has a history of its own. As we have just seen, some of these are histories of how they were built, but there are histories of discoveries as well. As let us now turn to some of these. In 1796, a local Raja wanted to build a temple, stumbled upon the ruins of the stupa at Amravati. Students, where is Amravati? Amravati today happens to be in Andhra Pradesh. Okay, it's not in North India like Sanchi Stupa, which is in Madhya Pradesh. Amravati is in Andhra Pradesh. He decided to use the stone and thought there might be some treasure buried in what seemed to be a hill. Some years later, a British official named Colin Mackenzie visited the site, although he found several pieces of sculpture and some detailed drawings of them. These reports were never published. In 1854, Walter Elliot, the commissioner of Guntur, Andhra Pradesh, visited Amravati and collected several sculpture panels and took them away to Madras. These came to be known as Elliot marbles after him. He also discovered the remains of the Western Gateway and came to the conclusion that the structure of Amravati was one of the largest and most magnificent Buddhist stupas ever built. By 1850s, some of the slabs from Amravati had begun to be taken to different places, to the Asiatic Society of Bengal at Calcutta, to the Indian office in Madras, and some even to London. It was not unusual to find these sculptures adorning the gardens of British administrators. In fact, new officials in the area continued to remove sculptures from the site on the grounds that earlier officials had done the same. So it was a tradition because it was such a big and massive structure that every British official who got posted in Amravati or around those places used to take it as as a memorabilia that yes, they were carrying a piece of history with them, some stone slabs, something or the other, always. And they could do so because of the position of influence. They were important people because at that point in time, India was ruled by the Britishers. So one of the very few men who had different point of view was an archaeologist named H.H. Cole. He wrote, "It seems to me a suicidal and defensible policy to allow the country to be looted of its original works of ancient art." But students, just to kind of stretch this a bit, you have to understand that British, they themselves in England, they did not have such an old history or civilization of their own. So they were very fond of. They used to get enamored by the lands which they ruled, and whether it was in Africa, whether it was in Asia, and every time they used to come across such marvels of history and monuments, they had this habit, and it was the same with French even. They had this habit of taking it along with them to their respective countries. The French did it to a great extent when they were ruling in Africa, and also when they were ruling in the Eastern Indias, or rather East Asia, the areas around which you today known as Cambodia and Vietnam, and all these places. The early rulers of these places were the French. Like British were ruling India, the French were ruling those places. So even the French used to do that because they did not have such an old civilization as us, or for that matter, the people of today, the people of Vietnam or Laos, Cambodia, for that matter. And the same thing was done by the British. They not just looted, say, for example, the historical monuments of India and laid them in ruins, but even when they were ruling in many parts of Africa today, in fact, many African countries today are demanding that the British return their artifacts which they had taken along with them to England while they were ruling Africa, the African countries. Countries like Ethiopia, and Ethiopia was then ruled by Italians, and Italians took a great amount of historical artifacts with them. So it was not something that it was only Amravati. This thing rather happened only at Amravati. It was a global practice, and all the Western powers who were ruling in different parts of the globe at that point in time and who were the colonizers, they were very fond of taking away these historical artifacts from different countries and different civilizations, because they themselves did not have that kind of great historical legacy which these civilizations had. We shall continue. Thanks.